Pine Cones and the Hunchback. My Truth in Story Form by Sammy Kay. Written April 18th, 2014. Recorded September 21st, 2022. My luck finally ran out. Mama called me at 6 a.m. last Friday and told me point blank that she expected me to be home for homecoming the following Saturday morning early. Her exact words were, "Girl, get your tail up before the birds build a nest in your behind and get on that highway. You know I don't like you going up and down the road by yourself." I said, "Yes, ma'am." She made her last statement with a smile in her voice, but she knew how much it bothered me. Okay, so I am not a morning person. I never have been, and in all likelihood, I never will be, but that's okay. Since I am now almost 30 years old, I no longer feel the need to feel bad, but my mama still has the power to make me feel bad about anything. So, it is 5:45 on this Saturday morning, and I am headed down 59 to the beautiful East Texas town where I was born. The downtown area has cobblestone streets. I think the entire town has thick red clay dirt somewhere. Tall, stately pine trees line the landscape, and the town is nestled amongst amazing rolling hills. It is nothing short of beautiful. It really is. My favorite music is playing not at all softly. Actually, it's pretty loud. It's wonderful. And I have to admit that the sunrise is breathtaking. Since I don't see too many sunrises, I decided to stop and actually take a few pictures. Photography is my favorite hobby, so I am never without at least two cameras. Okay, I am not looking forward to this trip home. Oh, I love going home to see about my mama, who is actually my grandmother. I visit her at least once a month. Two of her widowed sisters live with her, and they are all forces to be reckoned with. They are so funny. When Daddy died several years ago, they decided to move in together to better take care of each other. They do a really good job, but I still have to make sure they're okay. Of course, they have their fair share of drama, but overall, they have managed to do no bodily harm to each other or anyone else, at least not yet. With the help of intricate planning, I have managed to avoid attending homecoming since adulthood. hmm I am surprised that my mama hasn't forced the issue, but that is a topic for another day. Our church was actually started over 80 years ago by one of my mama's older brothers. His name was Johnson Gallen. And the church was built on a small hill surrounded by a small grove of pecan trees. Hence the birth of Johnson Chapel, CME Church. The church is small, but probably still beautiful, at least to me. There was an ancient bell in the tiny tower that was so old they were afraid to actually ring the bell very often, which was fine with me because it was creepy. It even sounded creepy and scary. I probably had been looking at too many horror shows. One day the opening was left open, and I couldn't resist looking up into the dark tower. The shadow of the huge bell scared me to death. I still remember it well. I use the word probably because I have not been to the church since I left almost 10 years ago. The small group of families who love and support the church would make sure that it was taken care of. Of course, the core members are old, in poor health, or deceased, but their children would still do whatever is needed to make sure that the church is in good condition. Even I still contribute financially, and I make sure that my mama and her sisters don't have to bear that burden. I do it for them. It's not a burden, but the closer I got to town, the tighter the knot that I had been trying to ignore became. I was finally forced to take that trip down memory lane that I wanted so desperately to avoid. My daddy was a steward, and my mama was a stewardess. We went to church 4 times a week. Monday night was business meeting, Wednesday night was Bible study, and Friday night was choir rehearsal. We went to Sunday school, morning service, and later evening service. Hmm. When I was 9 years old, after a business meeting, so it had to be a Monday, we stopped at Pastor and Mrs. Frank's house. He was, I guess, what would be today, he would be an assistant pastor. And she was always over the Sunday school department. She was a tall, thin woman who was always gentle, soft spoken, and very, very nice. He, on the other hand, was quiet and creepy. You could just feel him looking at everyone while trying not to let them see that he was looking with such intensity. Now, sometimes I wonder if he was mainly focused on the children, and that's why I noticed. I don't know. He was short and had a strangely curved, bent back. When I was younger, I thought he looked like a turtle because he did not appear to have a real neck. I love to read, and I always took a book to church with me when the grown people had business to take care of. One of my favorites was any classic illustrated. I love them all. I probably owned them all. I had a copy of Robinson Crusoe that I was reading for probably the 10th time. I had been sitting in the living room, and Mama was in the kitchen with Mrs. May Lee. Apparently, Daddy had left. But I don't remember him leaving. I just know that he was not there. I got up to go to the bathroom and was surprised to see Pastor Igor, and yes, that is his real name. He was sitting in a straight back chair directly across from the bathroom. I remember stopping for a minute, holding my book tightly as I tried to figure out what to do. You see, the entire house was so tiny, it felt like a dollhouse. In order for me to go to the bathroom, I would have to touch him. He was that close to the door. Well, the decision was made for me because I really, really needed to use the bathroom. So I slowly walked toward the door. When I was within his reach, he grabbed my arm and took the book from my hand and placed it in his lap. He quickly placed his hands on my chest where my breast would one day be. He was holding me in place. He pinched seemingly as hard as he could while rubbing back and forth. The pain was sharp and deep. I did not know what he was doing or why, but I know that I felt ashamed. I was speechless. I looked at his tiny serpent looking eyes and wanted to die. Finally, I was able to pull away and run back to the living room. I forgot about needing to use the bathroom. For years, I asked myself why I didn't scream, why I didn't stop him, why I didn't do something. I felt so guilty because I didn't stop him. I sat on the edge of the couch, trembling. I wanted to cry, but my eyes would only burn. I remember they just would not stop burning. I wanted to run into the kitchen and tell my mama, but I could not move. I vividly remember thinking that this had to be my fault. I had to have done something wrong. I also kept those feelings for many years as well. I jumped when he slithered silently into the room and tossed the book, my book, onto the coffee table. The book landed on the edge of a bowl of pine cones, sitting on a starched white runner with red embroidery around the edges. We had several runners just like that. I think everybody did. One of my aunts taught me how to embroider. I don't know how much time passed before I heard my daddy knock on the front door. I just remember feeling relieved. Mama came out of the kitchen, and I remember Mrs. Maylee gave me a hug as we were leaving. She asked me if I was cold because I was still trembling. I left the book on the table with two pine cones covering the picture of Robinson Crusoe, longing for someone to save him. I jumped into the backseat of the car and tightly closed my eyes. When we pulled into our driveway, I pretended to be asleep, hoping my daddy would pick me up and carry me into the house like he used to. But they woke me up so I could walk. I mean, after all, I was a big girl, right? But I didn't feel like a big girl. Church was never the same. I had trusted everyone I had grown up seeing every Sunday and most of the rest of the week. Now I did not know who I could trust. And yes, I still have trust issues, especially with men of the cloth. I would sit in Sunday school and look at Pastor Eagle and wish all kinds of bad things would happen to him. But then I would immediately feel guilty and ask God to forgive me. The more I looked at him, the more fitting I felt his name was. His mother's choice was perfect. It was an ugly name for an ugly person. He no longer looked like a turtle. He looked like the picture on the cover of my copy of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. By the time I packed Mama and my aunts into my car to drive to the church, my nerves were much better. Yes, I had to do some serious praying to get them that way, to get them to that point. It helped that they were pleased with the fancy new underwear I brought them. They like underwear, and I love buying pieces for them that they would never buy for themselves, at least not now. They were grumbling because the food for homecoming was now catered. Back in the day, the women prepared food for their families, and everyone shared their special dishes with, with each other. Well, almost everyone. Unfortunately, one year, several of the older members ended up with food poisoning, and the decision was made to have the food catered. I think they secretly enjoyed the fact that they did not have to do all that cooking. I know I certainly would have. However, those were very good times. The presence of unity and the importance of family, not just blood family, but church family, it was priceless. I remember Mama had a red Scottish plaid cooler that she used to pack some of the food. It was round and big enough for me to sit on. A good memory. Innocent memories are good memories. I allow myself to embrace and enjoy those good memories. I strongly suspect our mindsets no longer have room for experiences such as these. which is our great loss, a huge great loss. Quite a few young folk had come for the occasion, so it was nice to see people I had not seen in years. I grew up in the midst of elderly people, so I am comfortable just listening to their conversation. More young women should take the time to soak up the wisdom of women who have traveled many of the same roads that they are traveling today. And they survived. And they survived well. I must interject that they can also be extremely entertaining. I was expected to explain why I was still not married. I managed to respectfully evade the question, several times to be exact. You know, it's a challenge to be respectful when people are asking you questions that are frankly none of their business. But we learn how to do it at a very early age, and we knew we better not forget. After taking a long, pointed look at my mid length natural hairstyle, one of the good sisters informed me that I might find a husband if I straightened my hair. Since Mama had made the same comment, I was neither surprised nor offended. But being an adult is a beautiful experience, isn't it? And I seriously enjoy living my life my way. So I can be respectful. Mm-hmm. I sure can. I was sitting in the relatively new cafeteria, thinking that Johnson Gallon would have no doubt been proud of his efforts to provide a place to worship the Lord. I looked out of the window just as a blue nursing home van pulled up to the door. I watched as they carefully pushed a wheelchair down the ramp. As I looked at the man bent over in the chair, I did not have to see his face to know who he was. Although he was small and frail, his back seemed to be even more pronounced and round. He was slowly folding into himself. He very slowly raised his head, and I looked into his eyes. No, his eyes did not look kind, gentle, or in any way benevolent. None of the softening that often comes with age. His beady little eyes were still serpent like and surprisingly sharp. He was very much aware of his surroundings, which means that he is also just as aware of his condition. I noticed that he had very little use of his hands. I envisioned him sitting uncomfortably in a full diaper as he remembered the nasty, disgusting deeds of his past. Apparently, he had partial speech since he was attempting to converse with the older members who went to greet him. Mm-hmm. Once a pastor, always a pastor, at least in his mind. By the time they entered the cafeteria, I had learned that he had two daughters who came down after his wife died and took him directly to the recently opened nursing home. They had not been back to see about him, not even once. The church members, however, made sure that he was comfortable. These same church members also had no problem condemning the daughters. We Christians seem to quickly forget that one should never attempt to judge what you do not know. There was a reason his daughters left him there. Or at least that's my opinion. You probably think that I made a point to avoid Pastor Igor. But before I could do that, I was suddenly compelled to go into the sanctuary. There were changes, but I looked around and thought about the many Easter speeches that we had to say at both morning and evening service. I always had mixed feelings because I would be excited about learning the speeches, but because of my stutter, it was also very painful. But that's another story for another time. Mama loved clothes. So sometimes when she had extra money, I would have two outfits instead of one. I think she knew how I struggled with Easter. Well, I remember the day I joined church. I was 10 years old, and it was on Mother's Day. Mama was so happy. Actually, so was I. I was happy because I was making her happy. But I remember feeling loved. Loved by Jesus. That's what I felt. It was nice. I walked slowly up to the altar and kneeled down. I was gently overcome by a sense of peace. I left the pain, fear, shame, and the remnants of misplaced guilt of an innocent child right there on the altar of this tiny church that will always be home. Mama finally cornered me when I returned to the cafeteria and took me to speak to Pastor Igor. No, I didn't resist. And yes, that was God, not me. He looked up and our eyes locked. Mine were still damp from the tears shed in the sanctuary as I rededicated myself to Christ. His were still as cold as ice. After I said hello, I knew without any doubt that he remembered me and what he had done. Deep down, I knew that God made sure that he clearly remembered. I refused to look away. God gave me the strength to stare at him until he tried to look away. I then realized that his head would not turn to either side. He could only move his head up or down. Finally, he slowly dropped his head. Surprising myself, I reached over and gently touched his back. He jumped and started to tremble. Was his trembling as painful as mine had been so long ago? I wonder. At that moment, I realized that I had forgiven him. God had blessed me with the freedom and power of being able to forgive this man. This man who was not a representative of God. He was not a representative of this church. He was just a man. I will admit that when I thought about the almost guaranteed probability of his molesting other children, I could not help but think how fitting it would be if Pastor Igor lived a very long life, just like this. Thankfully, that was not my decision to make. Life, as well as vengeance, belongs to our Heavenly Father. Thank you.